Robert Jenrick's resignation letter has now been released, and I will share it with you now. And he says, the now resigned former immigration minister, he says, "It's with great sadness I write to tender my resignation as Minister for Immigration. I can't continue in my position when I have such strong disagreements with the direction of government policy on immigration." He says he's been pushing for the strongest possible piece of emergency legislation to ensure that under the Rwanda policy we remove as many small boat arrivals as swiftly as possible to generate the greatest deterrent effect. And he goes, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit now, in our discussions on the emergency legislation, you move towards my position, for which I'm grateful. Nevertheless, I'm unable to take the currently proposed legislation through the Commons, as I do not believe, this is the key bit, I do not believe it provides us with the best possible chance of success. A bill of the kind you're proposing is a triumph of hope over experience. The stakes for the country are too high for us not to pursue the stronger protections required to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges which risk paralysing the scheme and negating its intended deterrent. The letter goes on, but clearly he takes the view that unless the legislation takes Britain away from the European Convention on Human Rights, it is still, in some form, later on down the line, vulnerable to challenges in the European Court of Human Rights.
The Home Office Safeguarding Minister has confirmed on air that the Immigration Minister has resigned. Right. Can the Home Secretary confirm that, and did he know about it?
Mr Deputy Speaker, that has been confirmed. Of course, I speak with the ministers in the department regularly, but ultimately the questions at this session should be about the bill rather than about individuals in the House.
Guys, first of all, there it is. We're waiting for this resignation to be absolutely formal. It looks like it is formal. He has gone. How much of a blow?
I think it is a blow. Obviously, most people, he wouldn't even be a household name within his own household, Robert Jenrick. And so some people, I mean, you know, let's be frank, not many people know who he is. But that's not the point about his resignation like this. It's actually much more about the wider sense of chaos and instability. I was just on the tube on the way here, John, and I was with a shadow cabinet minister who said, look, it's got a real end of days feel, this, hasn't it? Jenrick's gone, who's next?
Who was saying this?
I can't tell you, but I remember
a cabinet minister.
Shadow cabinet minister.
Yeah.
And I think that there is that overall smell of decay. I think that's the real problem with it. You know, if you're a voter out there, you're thinking, well, are they getting on looking at and considering my problems, dealing with what I've got to deal with in daily life? Or are they just fighting amongst each other, just out to advance their own careers? And yet another minister no one's heard of is resigning.
Yeah, what do you think?
It's a real big blow to Rishi, and to just kind of paint a picture of this frenetic day we've just had. We were waiting for this emergency Rwanda legislation. Everyone's been discussing what's going to be in it. Is it going to be quote unquote full fat? Is it going to be enough for the Tory right? Will they manage to get it past their own immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, who obviously favoured a fuller fat version? And we were lurking outside the 22 committee, weren't we, which is where Rishi goes and addresses the troops and says, this is the new bill. He says, we need to unite or die now, stop waging war on each other, let's take the fight to Labour. And you know what? Outside that meeting, a few ERGers, a few people that were quite robust on Rwanda, but had some quite warm words about that bill, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, who spoke to me afterwards and said, look, I'm still going through it, but it looks pretty robust to me. So it was sort of starting to look okay, and then, boom, Robert Jenrick quits. So, and that's a huge blow.
Well, I guess the big question is it now, I don't know, a fissure which leads to a chasm, and will it widen? So will there be more like-minded right-wingers who join in a mood of rebellion? Talking earlier on to Bob Seeley, who's pretty hawkish on migration. He was pretty content with this, and he was saying, it was almost the message, as you say, Kate, unite or die. And talking to Mark Garnier on the other wing of the party, he was saying, look, let's go with this. We've got no choice but to go with this. It may be that, not everyone, maybe there'll be sort of some flaking off here and there, but maybe the party is going to, for the sake of being united, when being other than united is just disastrous, will swallow and go with it.
Well, the thing about Robert Jenrick is he doesn't have, quotes, people. He doesn't have sort of troops that he can, corral and say, well, this is a particular bit of the party. So even Suella Braverman has more than a handful of people that she could say are her people. And she hasn't really caused Rishi Sunak much damage, to be honest, politically speaking, after her resignation. But I think the difficulty with Jenrick is people will be thinking, well, why? Why would a former so-called moderate Tory MP? Don't forget, Jenrick, along with Oliver Dowden and a certain young Rishi Sunak, were the three so-called One Nation Tories in 2019, the summer, who said we're backing Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, a lot of people on the One Nation wing were backing Jeremy Hunt. These three young thrusters, Sunak, Dowden and Jenrick, said, no, we're going to back Boris Johnson. Why? Because we just think he's a winner, and because their politics are slightly centre-right. And now what we've seen today is Jenrick thinking maybe he'll stake a claim to leadership himself one day. Now, it might sound far-fetched, but he's very young, don't forget. Even if there were a two-term Labour government, he'd still be really young. Yeah. So you get another sense of him maybe saying, right, Kemi Badenoch is the front runner at the moment. She's the sensible, so-called sensible member of the right. No one imagines anyone from the left, like Penny Mordaunt or even, Tom Tugendhat would ever have a chance. So there's this idea of the wacky race is starting in earnest again for the next Tory leadership.
Do you agree with that, Kate? Do you think this?
No.
Is he playing his own fiddle here, or is this about his own convictions?
Is he resigning, maybe eyeing up the leadership in maybe a way that Suella was? Right, she's also a conviction politician that feels very strongly on this stuff. I don't think anyone would doubt that. But clearly she's run for leader before and everyone would expect her potentially to run again. Do I think Robert is in that same place? No, I just don't. Why is Robert's resignation significant when, as Paul rather unkindly says, most people won't have heard of him? It's significant because you've had both the Home Secretary and now the Immigration Minister, who, remember, was originally a very close ally of Rishi's, both quit the department over the same issue. So you've gutted that key department. That department is what your main domestic legislative agenda is hung off. So it is a huge blow for that. There's another reason why it's a blow, is because you've got this troublesome group of about... it depends how you count them, but 20 upwards of Tory right-wing MPs who Rishi needs to try and keep on side, get them to stop constantly criticising him, stop waging civil war. And it's those MPs that he's sort of siding with by resigning. And he may well be one of their kind of de facto leaders now. Yes. I mean, you'd never think you'd be in this position just a few months ago, where Paul's quite right. Everyone thought Robert was put into the Home Office to really be Rishi's eyes and ears, Rishi's man, keeping a check on Suella. Well,
let's have a look then at what was actually announced today and what is in this piece of emergency law, which is meant to get flights off the ground and on their way to Kigali, bearing asylum seekers. Because I guess if that happens anytime soon, well then what have some right-wingers got to complain about? The plane will be in the air. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to work. It doesn't mean it's going to stop Channel boats crossing the Channel and landing on the British coast. However, what is actually in this bill? Just have a quick listen back to a bit of what James Cloverly, the Home Secretary, had to say in the House.
Given the Supreme Court's judgment, we cannot be confident that courts will respect the new treaty on its own. So, today, the government has published emergency legislation to make unambiguously clear that Rwanda is a safe country and to prevent the courts from second-guessing Parliament's will. We will introduce legislation tomorrow in the form of the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill to give effect to the judgment of Parliament that Rwanda is a safe country, notwithstanding UK law or any interpretation of international law. For the purpose of the bill, a safe country is defined as one to which people may be removed from the UK in compliance with all of the United Kingdom's obligations under international law that are relevant to the treatment in that country of people who are removed there.
So James Cloverly in the House a little earlier on, but will it work? Let's talk about that next. Paul War and Kate Ferguson here with me on Pino and Friends. So Paul War here with us from the Eye, and so is Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday on Pino and friends. Just looking at a tweet, guys, from Andrea Jenkins, the right-wing Conservative MP. He says, well done to Robert Jenrick for resigning. As his former Parliamentary Private Secretary, when he was Secretary of State, I saw his strength and how he stood up to civil servants. I know what a decent man he is and how he adores his family. This may be, she says, the death knell for Sunak's leadership. And I should point out that Andrea Jenkins, who is a very nice person with a very good singing voice, but is also hawkish on just about anything you care to mention, and that may be a bit of wishful thinking. I mean, our colleague, Pippa Creer, in the lobby for The Guardian, she said, been speaking to a senior minister close to Jenrick last week, and quoted saying this: Rob's distancing himself from Rishi. It's as simple as that. He's young and is in this for the long term. I can see which way it's going, they said. So and Paul's nodding vigorously.
That feeds into my point that I was making about he's looking to the long term. I mean, Kate was suggesting, I was suggesting he was trying to run for leader this time. That was not the point. The point is that in the long term, after a 2-term possible Labour government, he's young enough to then maybe in 6 years' time, 7 years' time, say, look, I put a flag in the sand back then. I stood up for principle, back me. And I think that sense that people are looking over Rishi Sunak's shoulder again is just going to be damaging. I mean, it's true that, as Kate says, on the whole, most Tory MPs, look, they want to be loyal. You know, they don't want to be fighting. They want to be getting on, keeping their seats. And that was the same under Boris Johnson. It was the same under Liz Truss. But it just shows that actually sometimes circumstance forces it upon them where they think, actually, I can't put up with this. Now, you might wonder whether or not they're ever governable. Are they just a rabble who are ungovernable by any leader, whoever they are? And that's what the public might just take away from this whole thing. You know, can anyone lead them?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm looking at another tweet. Our broadcasting colleague Nick Robinson of the BBC, he seems to be agreeing with you, Paul. He says the Tory boat hasn't just been stopped; it's been hauled below the waterline. As the immigration minister, former friend and ally of the Prime Minister Robert Jenrick, quits on the day his boss publishes his plan. He says, "Well, you get the picture. Well, we shall see. I mean, a lot depends on what the balance in the party more widely is on this. If Tory MPs rally round the thing, then there won't necessarily be a huge dust-up in the House of Commons in getting it through at least that side of the Houses of Parliament. But, of course, the Lords, that's the equivalent of a minefield, political minefield for this legislation. And there are still legal questions waiting to be asked about this piece of law. And what do you think about that? Looking at what was announced today, and is now in this piece of law, Kate, here it is. It says British courts will have to accept that Rwanda is safe. And to that extent, it answers what the Supreme Court said, because they said Rwanda was not safe. But there are various questions there now in the air. One of them is that it's possible for an individual lawyer representing an individual asylum seeker who's set to be pushed off to Rwanda to say, you can't send my client because they would be in serious danger. And so that would mean, because you get access to the court on that basis, it's then up to the court to make a judgment on all of that. That's one question mark. Yeah,
exactly. So in the bill, there's still this ability for individuals to bring individual objections or claims, individual appeals, sorry. It was interesting, just before I was hot-footing it here, I was in Parliament talking to two Tory MPs who both are pretty robust on Rwanda, and one was highlighting that point and saying, that's a problem for me. We're still going to get bogged down in these appeals. I don't think this is going to solve the issue. And the other person, who's usually very robust, was saying, well, you know, actually that's just rule of law. And while we do need to amend to pass this law so that we kind of kneecap or clip the wings of these activist lawyers, you can't totally strip an individual's ability to appeal away from them.
Yes.
But it's interesting that even among the robust Tory right-wingers, there's a split on this. This stuff about, even if Rishi gets this through Parliament, right, and he's got an 80-seat majority, it's probably 70 now or something, you know, so he'll get it through the Commons, bit of ping-pong with the Lords, but the Commons is supreme, they'll get it through. The reason it's problematic is if his party's not uniting around this, and it's just another Tory civil war story, all going through Christmas and the New Year into an election year, then, you know, what's in a way, what's the point of this legislation if your own party's just going to pick it apart?
Yeah, I mean that's, I guess, where the resignation does its damage, because that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Tomorrow that's going to be, you know, the top of the story. Not about there's a solution and Tory MPs are trying to put some wind in its sails. It's about Jenrick's gone, and, you know, and he's going to be joining the Suella Braverman faction of kicking up a storm in the wings. However, there may not be many of them kicking it up, but they can still kick up quite a storm when they put their mind to it.
They can. They're very good at it. And we love reporting on it, obviously, and so we amplify it. But, I mean, I think I've always said this about this Rwanda stuff. To me, it's always really been performative. It's all about performance. It's never actually going to make a difference. There's virtually any evidence that it's a deterrent effect on any migrants coming here. So it's all about trying to persuade the British public that one flight, that one image of them being, quote, sent back. Will that persuade people you're tackling the problem? So it's always been about performance, in my opinion. And Kate's right. If your own party doesn't believe in the performance, then what are you left with? What is the point of doing it? Because the whole point of it was a political device. And if you're politically divided on it, then it loses its meaning.
It would also be a bit of a mixed blessing if a flight or two takes off over these coming few months, and the boats keep coming at exactly the same volume, the deterrent effect, which is the point, that would have been blown.
I think that it's so important to these MPs to visually see that flight taken off. And there's kind of no getting over that now. That's what you've promised the British people. That's what you staked your kind of domestic legislation
on. But isn't it more about deterrence than about removals? Because I don't think anyone's suggesting Rwanda's going to be taking thousands of
It's the D word, it's the deterrent. If you take them at their face value, I was interviewing Suella over in Greece the week before she resigned. So it's like the last interview I was over there with her, and she was saying we crucially need to have a deterrent. She says, other countries have theirs, and that's what that's the missing bit of the jigsaw for us. Yeah. And I think she genuinely thinks that, and I think Robert came to genuinely think that. Someone said to me, Robert became very radicalised by being in the Home Office. Maybe all Home Office ministers become radicalised.
Okay.
They need a prevent programme.
It's another good day for the Labour Party as well, because, again, we would naturally at some point in this conversation turn to the Labour Party and say, look, what really are your answers? And there's not a huge amount there to be said about Labour's alternative plan, but instead a senior ministerial resignation and still questions about the points we're making about deterrence and so on. It helps Labour out. It's an open target to shoot at.
Yeah, and James cleverly made that point quite effectively in the Commons tonight. He said, look, after Yvette Cooper got up and had great fun at ridiculing them, and where is your immigration minister? That's my first question to you. Forget the other questions. Do you have an immigration minister? She had great play over that. Then she went on a bit too long, to be frank, and some of the detail, and lost the room. But he got up and said, well, actually, your response, you didn't say a word about the legislation. You didn't say whether you agreed with it. You didn't endorse it. But the fact is that is Labour's policy. It's having a blank page on a lot of stuff and just letting the Tories tear themselves apart. And they're fulfilling their bit of the bargain, I've got to say.
Run silent, run deep, as submarine commanders say. I wonder how it's going to go down, because Downing Street, Rishi Sunak and the team around him are going to be looking at tomorrow's front pages, with a lot of anxiety. They need this to get at least some kind of a fair win from papers which are normally supportive. I mean, Kate, will that happen? Will there be friendly front pages for Downing Street to enjoy, or at least partially enjoy, or at least to sweeten the pill?
Look, I think that you're going to find a lot of papers, obviously I work for The Sun on Sunday, but a lot of the papers supportive that he's come up with this bill seems pretty robust. There's no getting away from the fact that, as you said earlier, tomorrow's front pages will all be about civil war and resignation.
And what about the verdicts of those friendly papers?
Our editorial verdict. Well, we will have to wait to see the leader columns come in tomorrow morning. Obviously, the leader writers will have been combing through those the bill today, and I think that actually you've had this before. I think our leader writers done this, and so have others. I think the Mail's done this too, where they've talked a bit about how more civil war isn't going to get the party anywhere. So you can take stands, you can push for certain policies, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't just start kind of letting off grenades and being at war with each other, because then, as you say, you just give Labour a very easy ride. Yeah. So I think there'll be that cautionary tone in the leader columns tomorrow.
But there might also be, and there's a very strong sense of this opinion amongst a lot of the newspapers, Tory supporting newspapers, is just why not go the whole hog? Why not do a full Braverman? Why not pull out the ECHR? Once you put that up the flagpole, it's meat and drink to a leader writer, because they don't have to run things, they don't have to govern, they don't have to consider the Northern Ireland Protocol, they don't have to consider real life. But so it's easy, and a lot of Tory backbenchers like it as an easy ejector seat. Let's get out. And the problem with that is it's got a whole range of complexities to it. And cleverly was trying to explain them tonight. You know, he made absolutely clear we're not pulling out the ECHR in this legislation. The smart thing to do is to do what they're doing, which is actually just tweak with the Human Rights Act, the British version of the ECHR, and try and make it more workable. But that doesn't satisfy leader writers because it's not simple.
Yeah, I mean, I want to look at that in a moment, maybe just after the news. Just imagine if Suella Braverman had got her way, and let's see Robert Jenrick on the same page, if they got their way, and this was a divorce from the European Convention on Human Rights, and that was somehow in the bill. Where would that have got the government? Where would that have got the Home Office? Where would that have got the Rwanda plan? Because as I sit here and I want to talk about it, all I can see down that route is pure obstruction, deeper division, and a failure to make any progress at all, looking at the reality of opinion on the Tory benches, let alone anywhere else. But I want to come to that in a moment. Right now, though, Kate, Rishi Sunak, I don't know, what's he thinking now? How's he feeling now? I mean, he's not, minister resigns or no minister resigns. No one's going to move against Rishi Sunak. That's just not going to happen, is it?
So I am of the camp that is just not going to happen. Now, maybe I'm just totally blind, but when some of my overexcited colleagues tweet about all these letters going in, they've heard that 40 letters are in, 30 letters are in. Yeah. I'm afraid I'm a total cynic. I just don't. I can't count on my hands who those 30 people are. And if you can't kind of roughly work out who they are, I think that you don't have those numbers of letters. Yeah. We saw Rishi, we saw PM a few times today. We saw him at PMQs, where I thought his tail was pretty up, but he always enjoys PMQs. We saw him going into the 22 committee as he was addressing the troops about this bill. He actually seemed relaxed, but Rishi kind of always seems like that. He must have known, gosh, Robert's in a room threatening to resign, or had indeed resigned by that point. He must have known that, but he has quite a good poker face, I think.
Yes.
But what's actually going to be going through his mind? Well, the task ahead of him now, these weeks, is to try and hold his party together. He needs to be getting, if Robert's gone, Suella's lobbing her grenades, they've got the new Conservatives being troublesome from the sidelines. He needs to be holding every single other MP together so that he's starting to drown them out with a consensus, and that's very difficult.
I can tell you now that Robert Jenrick's resignation letter has now been released, and I will share it with you now. And he says, the now resigned former immigration minister, he says, "It's with great sadness I write to tender my resignation as Minister for Immigration. I can't continue in my position when I have such strong disagreements with the direction of government policy on immigration." He says he's been pushing for the strongest possible piece of emergency legislation to ensure that under the Rwanda policy we remove as many small boat arrivals as swiftly as possible to generate the greatest deterrent effect. And he goes, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit now, in our discussions on the emergency legislation, you move towards my position, for which I'm grateful. Nevertheless, I'm unable to take the currently proposed legislation through the Commons, as I do not believe, this is the key bit, I do not believe it provides us with the best possible chance of success. A bill of the kind you're proposing is a triumph of hope over experience. The stakes for the country are too high for us not to pursue the stronger protections required to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges which risk paralysing the scheme and negating its intended deterrent. The letter goes on, but clearly he takes the view that unless the legislation takes Britain away from the European Convention on Human Rights, it is still, in some form, later on down the line, vulnerable to challenges in the European Court of Human Rights.